Hello and welcome to this video. Today we will be discussing the first book in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, The Gunslinger. This book started out as 5 episodic short stories that King wrote and published in Science Fiction and Fantasy magazine in the spring of 1970. The book that we know of today as The Gunslinger was first published in 1982. As King expanded the series throughout the rest of the books, he went back periodically and smoothed out any inconsistencies between the Gunslinger and the other books, with the final revised version being published in 2003, slightly before The Song of Susanna and The Dark Tower came out. The copies I have the trade paperback. This is the 1982 version, and I have it in hardback. This is the 2003 version. The 1982 version is roughly 208, 210 pages, whereas the 2003 version is right around 230, 235 pages. There was a lot of stuff that he put into the final revision that helped smooth out the story. The first version I read was the 1982 version, so when I had picked up the hardback and reread it, it was kind of jarring at first, not realizing that what King had done had filled in all the potholes and smoothed things in and went from there. This book is basically the longest prologue ever written. However, that does not diminish the story. In a way, having read these books about a dozen or so times, it actually enhances the story for me. There are people in the fandom that really don't care for this book, and I get that. I understand why, because if you're not a fan of world building and the delicate nature of building a rule, setting forth the rules of the world, and adhering to them, this book can be dull. Me, I am a fan of that kind of stuff. I love to see great world building in a story. I will be touching on elements from both the 1982 and the 2003 version. I will also be going into, at the end of the video, I'll either put a timestamp in the description below, or I will take and put one in the video somewhere. I'm not sure when I discuss the Dark Tower movie. So from this point on, there is the potential for spoilers. I would recommend, if you do not handle spoilers real well, this is your jumping off point. This is the stop the video and come back to it later portion of the thing. So, now, let's get into it. King, for me, the reason, as I stated before, that I like this book is because of the world building. The opening line for this is, the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. That, to me, is just the right amount of hook. It is up there with George Lucas's A Long Time Ago in a Far, Far Away Galaxy. Those are just hooks. They just reach out and get into you. We find out fairly quickly that our hero, the gunslinger, Roland Deschain, is not a nice guy. You find out that he has been chasing the man in black for God knows how long. It could have been 20 years, it could have been 50 years, 150 years. You find out real quick that time does not play by the rules that we're used to. Sometimes it expands, like stretching out a rubber band, and sometimes it contracts, like pushing something together, like pushing a sponge or squeezing a sponge. It expands and contracts. That time is kind of weird. So your narrator, Roland, who's telling the story, is unsure. Is very unsure. We find out real quick that Roland has lost a lot of his humanity. Roland is so bent on his quest to the Dark Tower that he has, like I said, lost a lot of humanity. He's not a nice guy. He's not the kind of person you would normally hang out with. In fact, he is just slightly less hateful than the man in black. Roland is, when we get introduced to Roland, Roland is building a campfire. He's getting ready to call it a night. He feels somewhere in his bones that he is slowly catching up to the man in black. Roland, then we go into Roland's thoughts. Roland starts thinking back. Let me correct myself real quick. Roland makes mention of something called devil grass. That the smoke from the devil grass basically gets you stoned. The flames of the devil grass will hypnotize you, and it's said that people will get so hypnotized by the flames that they'll see people dancing in the flames, loved ones, demons, what have you, and will jump into the fire. Roland muses that somebody who jumps into the fire, you may see them the next time you look into the fire. They may be looking out at you. So he is very cautious because in this desert, that is one of the few things left that will burn. That he can, he's in the desert, people. And we go into his thoughts. And he starts telling the reader about stopping at the last inhabitants before he hits the major portion of the desert. He stops, he finds a red-haired, red beard, bushy hair settler, Farmer Brown. At first, Roland is under the idea that this may be a trap, a magical spell or something set for him to spring by the man in black. So Roland is very, very cautious at first. Once Roland has realized that this isn't a trap, he starts to relax and loosen up a little bit. Farmer Brown has a pet raven by the name of Zoltan. Zoltan can talk. Zoltan is, his two favorite things are beans, the magical fruit, the more you eat, the more you toot. And the other one is fuck you and the horse you rode in on. It's just the things that this bird says over and over. After Roland basically befriends this guy, he informs Roland that there's an underground spring that he can access from behind his shack. So Roland goes and he fills his water skins. He fills everything up. So when he starts his journey again, you know, he's restocked on water. The Farmer Brown invites him for dinner. They eat in a palaver, which palaver is a word that King uses fairly regularly, not only in this series, but in several of his other books. The historical definition is an impromptu meeting between people that may or may not have a similar language. So, and that is the context in which King uses the term palaver. Also, King gives us this wonderful setting. I mean, it's not wonderful if you're a character, but if you're reading it, he goes into detail of the sand, the dirt, how hard it is for this farmer to grow his corn. And if it wasn't for this well, or this natural spring that flowed under where he built his cabin or his house, that he probably wouldn't be able to grow the corn. He also talks about that he has a man that brings him beans. When they cook dinner, he tells Roland, look, the corn is free, but you're going to have to kick in something for the beans. So Roland does. Because even though Roland has lost his humanity as a shell of a human, he still has the training and the customs and beliefs, or some of the beliefs, that he grew up with, embedded in him. There's just things that he will do just because that's what he's been trained to do. Within this story, or within this flashback, we get another flashback. Roland tells Farmer Brown of the last town he stopped in, the town of Toll, before he entered the desert. And in this town, because he was a stranger and it's a small town, the people in the town were kind of off-put by him at first. Then they grow not necessarily to like him, but not to distrust him. He quickly finds a bar, cafe, restaurant, all rolled into one, and he goes in. He finds that there's what we would call a drug addict. Is a weed eater. This person is so addicted to weed that he has just given up smoking it, processing it away. He just pulls it from the ground and eats it. His name is Mort, which is also Latin for death. Just throwing that out there. Mort had died, but was raised from the dead by the Man in Black. And the lady who owns the establishment explains to Roland what had happened. Goes through his funerary rites, and when the Man in Black showed up, how he raised Mort from the dead. And everyone was kind of suspicious of Mort for a while. Then Mort kind of fell back into things. So Roland orders some hamburgers, or hamburger patties that don't have any bread or any fresh bread. And he goes to sits down, he's going to eat. Mort comes to him and speaks, and excuse me, got a burp. What King refers to in this is high speech. You have high speech, which is spoken by the nobles and nobility, royalty, and what have you. You have low speak, which is what the common person spoke in. Ooh, I think I got gas. Roland is taken aback by this. And basically, the lady that owns this establishment invites Roland to her bed. And Roland takes her up on the offer. And that Roland haven't had female company for a while is rather pleasant. You know, he kind of loosens up and just kind of chills and decides he's going to stay in the town for a while and see what's going on. In the back of his mind, because of his interaction with Mort, he's thinking, maybe this is a trap. So he's kind of feeling things out. He goes about his business, goes through the town. There's a piano player who works at the establishment, and his name is Sheb. A younger Sheb will show up later in the series. This is the same person. In the original 1982 version, it didn't come out right and say that this Sheb was the same Sheb from later in the series. However, in the 2003 revised version, we find out that it is. Sheb becomes jealous because he had been betting the owner of the establishment, Allie was her name, for however long. And now Roland comes in and has kind of usurped his place in her bed. He gets jealous to the point that one day he comes in and tries to attack Roland with basically a butcher's knife. However, an old piano player is no match for a trained warrior fighter, which is what Roland is. Roland inadvertently breaks his wrists. Then Allie brings up the point that there's a church run by a female pastor. Allie does not particularly believe in the Christian doctrine, and she prefers not to attend the church. She doesn't care for Sylvia, the pastor of the church. She also makes a cameo later in the series. She is very much your fire and brimstone Southern preacher. Roland decides to see what she's about. Goes to her church one Sunday evening, stands in the shadows, and she gives a just momentous fire and hailstorm sermon about Satan and agents of Satan, the interloper. Unknown to Roland, she knows he's there. Later on in the story, we find out that Roland has made up his mind to go visit her at her house. Allie warns him against this. And Allie, so he goes, and she's expecting him. She's described as an extremely overweight, gluttonous human being. Just nasty and very off-putting. But because the magic spell that the man in black had cast over the town, she was waiting for him. She knew he was coming. And to a certain degree, she betwixts Roland, tempting him to have sex with her. Then Roland, she tells Roland that she's carrying the man in black's baby, a demon, or child. She refers to it as a child of God, or the king's son. And Roland is not real happy. Roland is the one that realizes that it's a devil or a demon or something of that nature. And there's an argument and stuff that ensues. Roland leaves, goes back to the town, goes back to Tull. Then, after a session of lovemaking, Allie confesses to Roland that after the man in black had revived or reanimated, brought back to life, reincarnated, whatever, Mort, that he told her that if she ever spoke the word 19 to Mort's ear, he would tell her what being dead was like, what the afterlife was like, what was going on, how it felt to be dead. Knowing that over time that the temptation of speaking 19 to Mort would grow and fester like a bad wound. It would just overtake her at some point. And the next day, Roland gets up and he's like, look, I've got to be moving on. I've got stuff to do, people to catch. And he's getting ready to leave town. Basically the town in whole turns on him. And he winds up massacring every human being in town. Man, woman, child. The people of the town had crucified Mort. So Mort was already dead. Allie at some point had spoken 19 to him, and it had driven her mad. And because of this madness and the spell that the Man in Black had cast over Toll, Roland, well, you get a wonderful scene. It talks about how Roland the Gunslinger, the warrior, comes out, and his conscious mind is no longer in control of his body. He reverts to his training, his shooting, his reloading. Everything is an automatic reaction, like breathing or a heartbeat. And he's basically narrating to the reader what's going on. And he leaves this, like I said, he massacres everybody. Some of the graphic novels one of the graphic novels that have come out is called The Battle of Toll, which I personally think is not a good name for that book. It should be The Massacre of Toll, though I don't think that would play out well with the readers. However, he does. He kills every one of them. He kills the preacher lady, kills every inhabitant of the town, and it is a long, drawn-out battle. He gets stabbed, gets cut, gets stuffed in the head. He gets his cage rattled several times, but he gets through it. And because he's become the shell of a man, he feels no remorse, none at all. He has butchered, massacred, slaughtered every man, woman, and child in this town, and feels zero remorse for it. In his mind, in the warrior's mind, he did what he had to do to complete his task. Then we come back to him in the shack of Farmer Brown, and they have, they finish up the evening. Both of them smoke a cigarette and go to bed. When the next day comes around, the farmer bids them goodbye, gives them some corn for the road, and Roland sets off to the desert. And this is where we catch up to the beginning of the book. Now it is the next morning. Roland has caught the reader up to where he's at right now. So, in doing so, we start out fresh with Roland at this point. Then we move. He's going through the desert. He has his lamentations, his trials, tribulations. And then he comes across the way station. In the middle of the desert, out of nowhere, there's this building. It has a house, stable. It's set up for multiple occupants, kind of like a hotel or a motel, just kind of in the middle of this desert. And he thinks, he knows, he has convinced himself that this is a mirage. This is something laid as a trap by the Man in Black. So he cautiously approaches it. In doing so, he discovers a young boy. And basically faints at that point. The young boy, it is revealed, is Jake Chambers from New York City, somewhere around 1977. That's got teleported into this world somehow, got drawn into this world. When Roland comes to, he's found that the boy hasn't killed him or hurt him. Jake admits that he thought about it. They have a palaver. Roland basically hypnotizes him because before Roland hypnotizes him, Roland asks him a series of questions. And Roland doesn't sense any dishonesty in the boy. However, what the boy tells him, from Roland's standpoint, is unbelievable. He can't fathom it. He can't understand it. So he decides to hypnotize the boy. In doing so, in hypnotizing the boy, Roland finds out that there's even more questions, even more things that he doesn't understand. In the 2003 version of the Gunslinger, the boy's description of New York reminds him of the fabled city of Lud, L-U-D, Lud. But Roland is having trouble connecting it. When Jake has finished his story, Roland asks him, "Do you want to remember this, yes or no?" And the boy says no. So Roland has the boy lay over and go to sleep, go to what he calls his true sleep. He ponders it. Part of Jake's story was he was pushed into traffic by a man wearing black robes. Or he was pushed into traffic, and while he lay dying, he saw a man in black robes who he thought pushed him. And by Jake's description of the black robes, Roland knows it's the man in black. So Roland has formed this idea that the man in black pushed Jake into traffic, and as he was dying, drew him into Roland's world, Roland's universe, Midworld, is what we come to find out later is his section of this multiverse is called Midworld. And this touches Roland. Roland starts to find his humanity. The seed has been planted with Jake Chambers. Roland goes to sleep. They wake up the next morning. They figure out what they're going to do, what they need, what supplies they need to go. And Roland has decided that Jake has to come with them because it would not be honorable to leave this 13, 14-year-old boy at this way station by himself in the middle of the desert. That is one thing that, despite Roland's loss of humanity, he valued honor. So he asked the boy about any provisions that he may have found. He said, "Look," and Jake told him, "Look, dude, there's a cellar. I don't know what's down there. I was afraid to go down there because I thought the ladder might break." So Roland's like, "Cool, I'll go down." And he goes down. He finds canned food, canned corn, canned vegetables, what have you. He also hears a sound. He also finds a bunch of mutant spiders, up anywhere from 8 legs to 16 legs, just all over the place, in various sizes. Everything from the size of probably about a dime up to about the size of a softball, if not bigger. But this noise he hears from behind the wall, Then, once again, Roland the gunslinger, Roland the warrior kicks out. And he draws his pistol, waiting for something to attack. And he spies a hole in the wall. And he recognizes the sound as a demon trying to speak. And he tells the demon, look, if you got something to say it, dude. And the demon does. The demon tells him, the man in black has your soul in his pocket while you travel with the boy. And this kind of unnerves Roland. So Roland, at the end of the demon's monologue, punches through the wall and finds a body and rips the jawbone from the body. Because he knows, something tells him, we're kind of introduced to the concept of Ka at this point. Something tells Roland he needs this jawbone. So he takes it, puts it in his rear pocket, gathers the food, everything, takes him up the ladder, hands what they can carry to Jake, and they pack up and they leave the way station. And as they travel through the desert, we don't know, Roland doesn't know, Jake doesn't know, the reader doesn't know if they've been in the desert for days, weeks, months. However, the seed of humanity that was planted by Jake Chambers starts to grow. And Roland finds himself having more and more parental or fatherly feelings toward Jake. I need to point out at this point that Jake Chambers, initials are JC, Jesus Christ, JC. Hold on to that thought. We'll get to it later. Roland has become more and more human. He's starting to show signs of humanity, signs that he's regaining, regrabbing. Not quickly, but slowly, kind of like a trickle from a sink dropping. Doop, 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 is how his humanity is growing. And it's starting to take root in his soul. Then they eventually come out of the desert into a rocky, green, lush area. One night while in this area, they eat. Roland goes out, hunts and kills a rabbit, and brings it back, and they have something other than canned food and water. And they go to sleep, or they start to go to sleep, and Roland notices Jake get up and wander off, kind of sleepwalking. He follows Jake and finds out there's what they call a speaking circle, which is kind of described as like a miniature Stonehenge, Easter Island thing, kind of together in this clave. Roland knows that in these speaking circles are imprisoned demons, and these demons are very sexually abusive. They will speak to you, they will tell the truth, but it is at a cost. And evidently, the demon in this particular speaking circle has eyes for Jake. So Roland saves Jake, takes him back to the camp, gives him the jawbone, and tells him to hold on to it. And he is surprised that Jake isn't put off by a dead, human jawbone. Jake's like, oh, okay, I'll do it. Jake allies him or thinks of Roland more in the short time or long time, we don't know, that Roland is more of a father figure to him than his own father. So he just kind of like, yeah, okay, you tell me to hold on to this jawbone and sit here by the fire, I'm going to do it. Roland then breaks out some mescaline. He takes the mescaline and tells Jake that you need to stay here, I'll be back. I don't know when I'll be back, but I'll be back. More or less the same as I am. Roland goes to the speaking circle and basically offers himself to the demon in return for information. And they basically, Roland asks some questions, and the demon, while basically raping Roland, tells Roland that in order to catch the man in black, you're going to have to sacrifice the child. You're going to have to sacrifice him. He is going to be your blood sacrifice for redemption, so you can get to the man in black, catch the man in black. This, above all else going on, hurts Roland the most. All the molestation, all that, it bothers him, it hurts him physically. But the knowledge that he's going to have to sacrifice the boy, let the boy die in order to go forward, kind of messes with Roland a lot. So he comes back, doesn't tell Jake any of this. Jake somehow senses that he's the sacrificial lamb. They continue their journeys. They go through the mountains. They enter the mountains. They find what appears to be an old subway rail line that goes under the mountain. And through this, they find a rail car. They find several stops along the way. They fight off what are called slow mutants, people that have been mutated over the age. These particular slow mutants live in these caverns. They're ghoulish, nasty. And it is through this adventure that Roland becomes more and more human. He's starting to get this grip on his humanity. The particular mountain they're in at this point is called Golgotha, parallel to the hill in the Bible, Golgotha, where it is said that Christ was crucified. Jesus Christ, JC. And they go through, they have several encounters with the slow mutants, they fight them off, and they get to a point where Roland has to make a decision. Save Jake's life or confront the man in black. And this deeply, deeply disturbs Roland. Roland is his quest to catch the man in black, his quest to the Dark Tower, at this point where his humanity is just starting to grow, overshadows it. And Jake tells him, look, he tells him, and I quote, "Go then, there are other worlds than these," and falls to his death. So Roland is able to catch up with the man in black. They have a palaver. The whole time that Roland is with the man in black, he is uneasy. He's afraid that the man in black's going to try to kill him or poison him or whatever. But the man in black doesn't. We find out that the man in black is a servant, mid-management, I guess you'd call it, for the bad guys. And the palaver, they have the man in black produces 3 tarot cards. One tarot card is the prisoner. It has a young man with a monkey behind him with a whip. The second card is the woman of the Lady of the Shadows, excuse me. Brain locked up there for a second. Lady of the Shadows. And it has a woman, dark skin, with 2 faces. And you have the third card, which is death. And the man in black, who we have found out now is Martin Broadcloak. We'll go back to that in a second. And he tells Roland that this is death, but not for you, Gunslinger. He explains that he will have to draw 3 people to aid, that his magic number is 3. The prisoner, the Lady of Shadows, and death, or the pusher. We learn later on that he's the pusher. And with that, they go to sleep. They sleep. In the 82 version of the Gunslinger, they sleep for an undefined amount of time. And in the 2003, it's hinted at that during this sleep period that Roland goes Todash. We'll find out more about Todash later. And when Roland awakes, he finds that Martin, or the man in black, is dead. Not only is he dead, he's long dead. He is nothing but a skeleton. So, once again, in Gunslinger training, he breaks off Martin's jaw and puts it in his backpack or his knapsack. He has like a man purse that he carries. He puts it in there. And he proceeds, and this is basically how the book ends. Getting back to Martin, the reason why I hold this out separate, the reason why I hold this back separate is because we found out during his time, Roland's time with Jake, he tells a story of how he earned his guns. Basically, Roland was Jake's age and had discovered that his mom was sleeping with Martin behind his father's back. And this so angered Roland that he challenged his teacher to the Duel of Manhood. Basically, if you win this duel, you earn your right to be a man, to carry guns, to be a gunslinger. If you lose this challenge, you're a castaway. You're cast away from everything you know, sent out to be basically forgotten. You're banished. Roland is successful in his challenge of his teacher, Court. And by defeating Court, he can claim he is now a gunslinger. He is now what they would call a man. And it was Martin Broadcloak, the Man in Black, who initiated Roland finding out about his mother's adultery in order to force Roland, to anger Roland to the point of making this challenge, not believing that Roland could beat Court. Roland does rise up and do this. He wins. And in the celebration of him winning, he basically goes to town, basically to Lowtown, or the town, not necessarily where the commoners live, kind of the ghetto or slums of town, and gets a whore. And this is kind of where the story ends. Him getting his guns, becoming a gunslinger, and catching the Man in Black. Throughout the book, though, that is, you get tidbits in the 1982 publication of The Gunslinger, but in the 2003, it goes in more detail. He talks about Susan, the girl in the window, his first and only love. Talks about his friends, Cuthbert, Elaine, Jamie, which is interesting. In the original 1982 publication, Elaine is Alan, and over time it became Elaine. So there's that. And these, you get hints to his past, you get hints to who these people are, what role they played in his life. But they're crumbs. They're just kind of crumbs. After you've cut a slice of bread and taken the slice off, you get these crumbs. And that's what you get in this book. And it's laid out, in the 2003 publication, it is laid out beautifully. In the 82 version, they're smaller crumbs and they're farther out. In the in the 2003 version, they're splattered all through the book. There's this trail leading you to the next book, making you ask questions of what's going to happen, what's going on, why is Roland like he is, why is Roland such this hardened shell of a human being. And it's seeded very well. The 1982 version, it was the first version I read. So when I went back and read the 2003 version, when I picked it up in hardback, it was almost like reading a new book, reading a new story. But at the same time, it was the old story. It was kind of like getting a director's cut version of the story. You have the original 1982 publication, which was what the publishers wanted. Then he came back in 2003 and put out what he wanted. Roland is good. Roland is starting to be good. He's not good at this, but he's starting. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know why. You still, at this point don't understand why this means so much to Roland, why it's so big of a deal to Roland. And that's where I'm going to leave off on the book. Now I'm going to talk about the Dark Tower movie. Stephen King has said that this is kind of a sequel. If you haven't read the Dark Tower series, the idea of the movie being a sequel to the original books is kind of mind-blowing. But once you've read the books, you'll understand. The movie, for what it is, does a good job. It is a action adventure, shoot 'em up, fantasy western movie. And if you look at the movie in that vein, you understand why they did it that way. But if you wanted a true depiction of the books, no. They use some of the names. They use some of the icons from the books, the sigils and markings and stuff. But it is not the Dark Tower series books that they're following. I do not begrudge anyone that likes the movie. I enjoy the movie. I don't begrudge anyone that hates the movie, because I can understand why they would hate or dislike the movie if they went in expecting the Gunslinger, Drawing a 3, Wizard in Glass, Wind Through the Keyhole, Wolves of the Kala, Song of Susanna, and The Dark Tower. I can understand if that's what they were expecting, and this is what movie. I can understand that. And I respect the people that dislike the movie, and I respect people that like the movie. It comes down to how you view the movie. Idris Elba as Roland Deschain is good casting. Matthew McConaughey as the Man in Black was great casting for that movie. I think it's worth, if you can get it, you can rent it on Amazon Prime for a couple $3-4. And it's not a bad movie. It's not badly written. The action is there. It's boom, 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 boom. But like I said, I have to caution you, it is not the books. So, with that, I leave you all to next time. Peace.